All right, well, joining us on the line today is Giannis, and he is the author of a brand new book, My Electrician Drives a Porsche, Investing in the Rise of the New Spending Class. He's also an investor and also dubs himself the realistic environmentalist. Giannis, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us on Follow the Money.
It's great to be with you. I'm here in Houston, Texas as we speak.
That's right. You're driving around a all-electric Tesla Model S. What does that feel like to drive around the country?
Well, I've owned a lot of cars in my life, and it's an amazing piece of rolling technology. So anyone that's driven in a Tesla probably understands that. And I think first and foremost, as a consumer of an automobile, it has to be a great car. You want to have a pickup truck for hunting or a Ferrari for sports car driving, utility is number one. It's a fantastic machine. And I guess the first thing I should talk about is my book is titled My Electrician Drives a Porsche and I'm Driving a Tesla. So just to get that out of the way, the book has nothing to do with fast cars. It has everything to do with electricity and understanding how the world is changing. And so it's a young electrician who enlightens his family doctor, who's 58 years old. He lives in Seattle, never had a passport, and is really quite oblivious to what makes the world turn. And so they go on a page-turning adventure of enlightenment to talk about changing demographics, technology, energy, all the icons people see on the cover of the book. And it's all the information is presented in this really fun and memorable format. So that's first and foremost. I think I should just let people know that that's where a Tesla comes into the book title.
Makes sense. And talk about the realistic environmentalist. I know there's a lot of people out there who are strong, on environmentalism. Other people are not so much. They don't really factor that in. Explain what you mean by being a proponent of realistic environmentalism. What do you mean?
Well, I consider myself to be in the middle. I don't want to get involved in this big argument that takes place between capital G Greens and, climate change and deniers, industrialists, whatever you want to call them. I'm an investor and I'm in the middle. And your viewers are probably much like me. They look at it, where's the opportunity? And being a realistic environmentalist, what that means is, first of all, I recognize that fossil fuels are important to the energy mix. We're not going to go off of fossil fuels in one day. But at the same time, are we weaning ourselves off of some of the fossil fuels in the coming 10, 20, 30 years? And the answer is definitively yes. And it's not even a question of policy or being a capital G green. It's assets that are deemed uneconomic or assets that are stranded, things like coal, where we're going to go away from coal, not because of policy, simply because it's not the best fuel source anymore for electricity. And so as a realistic environmentalist, the second part of it is to understand and appreciate that there are 7.5 billion people that live on the planet. And they know how the world works now for the most part. More people, have emerged that are still emerging, but there are another, 1.2, 1.3 billion people that don't have electricity like you and I. They don't have running water in their homes. Who am I to tell them they can't have it? And more importantly, how can I even do this? They want it, and they're going to have it. And so a realistic environmentalist says, I understand that. And probably they're not going to be buying, expensive electric cars. They're not going to be buying, expensive green energy. It's probably going to be what is the fuel source in their jurisdiction, and how can that fuel source come to market as electricity so that they can live, with basic human dignity. And so in a nutshell, a realistic environmentalist sort of sits in the middle, and he just wants to understand these trends and these themes, and then also participate as an investor, because it's okay for environmentalism, innovation, and, of course, investment to all cohabitate together.
Speaking of the idea of the shift that's occurring, especially with these emerging markets over time, I remember a statistic I read. It's been many years ago, Gianni. It's probably different now, but I remember reading that if China consumed fossil fuels at the rate that Americans did, the way that we do, we represent 5% of the world, and we consume about 25% of the fossil fuels at last check. If China were to consume the same levels that we do per capita, they would require the entire Earth. Like, there wouldn't be enough for both of us. And so there's almost a need, right? There's almost a need to move towards some other alternative type of energy, because the rest of the world cannot possibly live the way that we have lived for the last several decades. True?
That is true, and that's why a lot of the leading innovation with respect to so-called renewable energy is coming actually from China. They recognize this absolutely. So they're already making these big pivots to renewable energy, and it's not even necessarily the economics or even policy. It's just social upheaval. I mean, we've all seen the rampant pollution in some of the mega cities of China. So they are addressing this, and this comes from many sources, not the least of which, of course, automobiles. They are now the world's largest vehicle market by far. To give everyone a quick recap, America, we're selling around 17 million cars a year. China's now 24, 25 million a year. Far and away the largest market. And, that's also going to be, they're going to increasingly electrify not just their light vehicle transportation, but also urban fleets, buses, cement trucks, mail carriers, postal couriers, these kind of things. And the other part of it is for fossil fuels, why they're developing so much green energy. Tens of millions of people still heat their homes, Jerry, with coal heating. Dickens-era coal heating. This is particulate pollution. There's only one way to alleviate this. I mean, people have to heat their homes, and so what needs to happen is they need to provide a lot more electrical energy so that they can get rid of that. Well, the worst of the evils in the pollution sort of metric, I think, is this coal heating. And so many, many things come together. And I've got a bunch of statistics and numbers I can get people to relate with. I don't know how much time we have, but if you want me to, in a later question, I can really give people a greater appreciation and understanding of the changes that have already happened. They are truly now, at this point, the leaders in the installation of wind and solar power.
They really are. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And one of the things that you focus your book on, and even the subtitle, is investing in the rise of the new spending class, the rise of the world's new spending class. And that, of course, what we're seeing. In fact, I was watching a story just recently, a media story about China's film industry. I've been watching this kind of evolve over time, and now you have China putting out 600 feature films every single year, threatening to overtake Hollywood in as far as production and profit levels and all of this. One of the things that we wrote a long time ago, Gianni, in the book that I wrote, was that the rise of China was going to be hard on America psychologically, because we have for so long been the world's number one everything, right? And we think of ourselves in those terms. That hurts an investor, doesn't it? That's a dangerous idea and a dangerous psychological view for an investor.
There's a lot of opportunity here. I mean, there's challenges associated with so much global growth, but there's also vast opportunities. And I look at this, what we call the new spending class. So yes, my book talks a lot, gives a lot of statistics and a lot of reference to all the growth that's taken place in China. And one thing I want people to understand is I throw a lot of information and facts at people in the book, but you don't even realize you're absorbing it because it's done in this adventure. It's a journey of two buddies, and you're really getting this stuff on a page-to-page manner that resonates with people. And so, yes, there are tremendous opportunities there. The largest economy in the world is the United States. It's about just over $18 trillion of output. China's now $12 trillion of output. In 2006, China only had $3 trillion of output. I mean, it's just been an incredible growth factor. And it is pivoting. It's becoming a consumer services-based economy. Many people have read about that. And there's a lot of confusion with the currency, the stock market, which doesn't encompass all Chinese people, and the actual economy. And it is pivoting to services. Today, it's about 54% services, and on its way to about 70%, just like the United States. Unless a calamity happens in the United States of America, it can take care of itself. And China wants to go that same route. They don't want to be the junkyard of the world anymore. And who's the future of the Chinese economy? It's the youth, the millennials. So let us put some perspectives here to this new spending class. There are 87 million millennials in the United States. Okay, there are 415 million in China. Just 5 times the number. Over 100 million of them have already graduated university, typically in things in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and math. They have far higher expectations than the generations before them. This is another one of the major reasons the economy is pivoting. These young people, they don't want any part of this factory job network anymore. Nothing to do with it at all. And to give people context, the fellows that run the country right now, these guys that are the demographic of the children of the Cultural Revolution, 55 to say 66, 67, 160 million in that demographic block, only 1 million college graduates. There's over 100x difference in enlightenment, in awareness, and it's their spending patterns and how we as investors can participate in that. It's a tremendous opportunity.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we participate, because I'm looking here, for example, in your book, and I'm seeing that, one of the amazing stats shows that China right now is building, well, between now and 2030, they're building about 1,000 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, which you point out is equal to 90% of the current U.S. power grid. That's just mind-boggling to think about that. How does the average U.S. investor take a look at this shift that's occurring and actually position themselves for the best? But just give us a few tips that investors can be looking at, focusing on.
Yeah, I'll give you a stealth one. I think something that's a really interesting opportunity right now for any investor. The classic line for any value investor is buy low, sell high. So if an industry is trading at all-time lows and it has a very interesting future, I think that's something to look at. So let's do a quick understanding of energy, of electrical energy. By this, we're talking about, of course, fossil fuels, renewable energy. America has an electrical capacity of 1,100 gigawatts of electrical capacity, and it's fallen. Used to be 45% of that was coal. It's fallen. It's around 35% of that is derived from coal, and a lot more from increase in gas. The rest renewables, hydro, nuclear, and then you do your ultimate renewables, which is wind and solar. China has a capacity today of 1,400 gigawatts of electrical capacity, but their biggest amplitude of increase is coming in green energy, wind and solar. They've invested about $150 billion a year over the past 4 or 5 years. The lion's share of that is coming from renewables. $100 billion of that 150 in green energy, only about $20 billion in coal, and falling. So this is going to pivot. Now, who's the biggest winner in this pivot? It's copper. It takes 4 to 5 times more copper per megawatt of utility when you create, transfer, and utilize greener and cleaner energy. People don't talk about this. So copper is trading at all-time lows. You look at there's a reason why Carl Icahn got involved in Freeport-McMoRan some months ago, and I think if you look up and down the food chain with how one can invest in copper, and you look at the different valuations, you say, boy, there's an interesting opportunity here because it's trading near all-time inflation-adjusted lows.
So copper is required, is a integral part of renewable energy.
It's the Achilles heel. It's the keystone. It's the magic component. To give you numbers, an electric car, which, we can get into that later. I'll give people statistics on how that's going to change. But they're about 300 to 400% more copper per vehicle. Plus you have to charge them. Wind power takes, 500% more copper per each megawatt compared to conventional electrical generation. That's because what they are is a generator. The big generator head, you have to collect all the power to a central point and, step up with the voltage, step it down, and move it into the transmission lines. So it's tremendously a heavy user of copper across the board. And I think we should really look at how vehicle transportation is going to change. I think this is something that investors have to look at as well. And I'll give you some examples for things to be cautious of and things to be optimistic of.
We're talking, by the way, with the author of a new book that is entitled My Electrician Drives a Porsche, Investing in the Rise of the New Spending Class. Of course, the new spending class would be people who are not in America. They are people who are overseas. In fact, you're pointing out places like China, Nigeria, and India, and many of these other types of markets that are now beginning to develop a middle class. Of course, they've had a middle class for some time, but many of them are in this upward mobility phase. And now they want automobiles. Now they want, nicer homes. They want refrigerators. They want televisions. They want air conditioners. They want everything that you and I have here in America. And the point of your book is simply to say the only way to achieve that is primarily by renewable energy, because there's just simply not enough fossil fuels in the ground that's accessible for us to be able to pull this off. So we're looking at different kinds of ways to invest. And you're saying copper is key is it pretty much all renewable energy, Gianni, or is it just mainly wind, or is it mainly solar, or is it across the board on renewable?
Yeah, it's across the board, but it goes even farther than that, because now we have to talk about efficiency and conservation, because that's another thing that is an interesting way that investors can participate. In the United States, Now, these things are mandated, that things like air conditioning has to be 10% more efficient by 2018, has to be 25% more efficient by 2023. The average automobile has to, right now, average American car is about 27, 28 miles a gallon. That's got to be 54 miles a gallon by 2025. So how do you make things more energy efficient? Well, I'll tell you that 47% of America's electricity is consumed by motors. And so to make a motor more energy efficient, it requires more copper. Typically, you would use a copper rotor motor, or you would use an AC induction motor. In some cases, you would use a permanent magnet motor, and then in many cases, you would have things like variable speed drives to oscillate the frequency of these motors. But it takes a tremendous amount of copper to make that happen. And also with transformers, you have to use copper windings instead of aluminum windings. And so even in efficiencies, and this is something that happens on a global scale. Everyone wants to use less energy, particularly big governments, like in China. They also want to have these efficiencies, and so it's yet another place where people can look at that opportunity, and it all comes down to the building blocks of making these things efficient. So I know I keep going down the path of copper, but when you look at it, it's pretty hard for an investor to figure out, well, how do they play the efficient energy or efficient motors or a better transformer. It's pretty hard for them to choose. Also, when you talk about automotive manufacturers, and if you want to invest in that, everyone's heard about Tesla. Everyone's heard about the tremendous success there. And, for me to guess the price of Tesla, it's going to go up or down. It's going to have some volatility in there because there are people that seem to want to short that stock. And I'm not a good enough trader to pick tops and bottoms and things like that. So let's go and look at the other opportunities of the building blocks that make these things possible. So with Tesla in particular, some of the critical components there are, people have heard about lithium and lithium-ion batteries, but there's also the graphite involved and the cobalt involved and the scarcities there. So there's a lot of different things. And so one of the tips I give people in my book is to go to conferences where all of these themes are represented. I don't have the time, with you in our 15 minutes to go over all the different variables, but they can go to conferences. It costs money to do these things. Probably your enlightened listeners probably do these things anyways, and also to get specialty newsletter services and listen to specialty radio programs like yours to get it. And you have to tune into these things like financial soap operas. You can't just tune in every 3 months. You have to really be aware and see where the changes are coming on a daily and weekly basis to really have that foundation. And what my book does, I think, is it gives you that initial foundation made, really, really strong to give you all those tips and clues and points you in the right direction and gives you the unbiased science, the facts, the stats. I don't do any prognostication, and I don't do any, hopefully nothing that's actually stale dated. My book is going to be relevant this year, I think, as much as it will be 3 and 5 years from now.
Oh, sure, probably even more so as we go forward and more people wake up to the realities that await us. Another statistic I found very interesting as well in the book, and also on some of the good stuff on your website as well, is the fact that only about 1 out of 5 Chinese actually have a driver's license. And yet, as you mentioned, they're already the largest auto market in the world. So when I think about China, though, Gianni, I think of a closed market. I think of a market that is increasingly difficult for the U.S. to really gain a good foothold in, because China is realizing that it can close its economy and still get away with a lot, right? And so one of the things that I think of whenever I think of Chinese car sales and I see Chinese movie sales and I see all of this, I think, gosh, can I really play that with a U.S. stock, or am I going to have to learn more about the Chinese stock market? What's your take on that? Are you mainly thinking, aside from copper, we talked about that major theme, but if you want to get in on China car sales that are exploding or whatever the case might be, are you looking at things like Tesla that do have the ability to break into China, or are you thinking more Chinese manufacturers and Chinese companies? What should the investor be looking at?
It is a hard market to play, and also because of the volatility we've seen in Chinese stock markets, it may not be somewhere that people want to play in. Because you saw what happened in Shanghai and Shenzhen and the stock markets in the past sort of 12 months. They had a huge boom. huge boom and then a big bust. But, you know, they're still higher than they were from a year and a half ago, just that they went up so high so fast with a lot of unsophisticated investors, Chinese investors I'm talking about, getting involved. There's a very, very small portion of these companies can be bought by foreigners. But there are groups that specialize in the Chinese market. There are people that are Chinese bears. Jim Chanos, everyone knows, is a famous bear. Kyle Bass is certainly not. Doesn't believe in the Chinese banking system. He thinks that there's going to be a massive explosion there. But then there are people that are following these markets very closely. My friends with Crane Shares, that's an ETF that follows the Chinese market, invests in the Chinese market, and it looks at giving disproportionate returns to their investors. And one thing that I'm involved with my CO2 Master Solutions partnership, which is going to evolve and turn into a fund later this year, it looks at all the ways to play this theme of the new spending class and people, particularly many things and opportunities that we're going to see around the world. It's going to be agnostic, it's going to be ambivalent, whatever the word you want to use. And a lot of it's going to focus on not just China, but this new spending class markets. So I guess to answer your question the long way around, yes, it's a difficult market for individual investors to dabble in, and probably one, unless you're doing it under the guise of something like a really interesting hedge fund or a really interesting ETF, I would actually caution people to stay away. Try to focus on the subliminal building blocks, things like the copper and maybe all those different commodities that are going to be winners and not losers. Like some of the fossil fuels losers, especially the metals winners, I think, going forward.
Very interesting stuff. Our guest today, Giannis Kovacevic. And the title of the book, My Electrician Drives a Porsche, Investing in the Rise of the New Spending Class. A very thin book that can be easily read. It's written in a very nice, illustrated way, in the fact that it tells a story, and it tells a very important story about the global shift that is occurring right now in our world. Giannis, I just want to close with this. I think this is really interesting. You're doing right now, to promote the book, you're doing a realistic environmentalist Tesla tour. You began in March in Toronto, up in Canada, where you're from, coming down into the United States, and then you're going to end up back in Seattle on May the 11th. You've just been touring the country and raising awareness about this. Just tell us a few things that you've learned along the way before we bring this to a close. Yeah,
for sure. People can actually follow my tour on my Twitter handle, @RealisticEnviro, and that same thing will correlate to Instagram or Facebook. And it's a very important journey, I think, to take. People that are aware of, particularly Tesla and are really hyper-aware of renewable energy are not as interested, but of course there's more people that are not aware of these things. And ultimately it's about explaining to people and physically showing them that the future is now. I took a really skeptical German journalist on one of the legs of my journey, and I told him, look, you tell me when you need to stop to take a restroom break or when you're hungry, we'll stop. Our drive from Toronto to Boston took no more time than it would have in a gasoline engine vehicle. I mean, charging these cars takes half an hour, 40 minutes. The chargers are everywhere. It's only going to be more so in the future, and people are slowly starting to wake up to it. And I think the tremendous success of the launch of the Tesla 3, okay, now they have to make the car and deliver them, but certainly there's pent-up customer demand. This is one of the greatest rollouts in history. In sales, it's about $11 billion. Car-wise, they're up to 325,000 pre-orders for these deposits. To give context, BMW only sells 95,000 3-Series, BMWs in the United States every year. I mean, every manufacturer wants this. They don't have any infrastructure, really. They do this with tiny little showrooms and, cheap rent in the warehouse district to service the car. So by taking this tour and engaging with people and doing interviews, and I do TV, print, radio, media, and various things in all the different cities, but it's the eye-opener for people that the fact that the future is now. This is not coming. This is here. And it's going to just happen so quickly. It'll be like the adoption of the Internet. Right now, some hotels offer charging for my Tesla. Many don't. But, that's really quickly going to ramp up. There's not going to be a hotel anywhere in the nation that doesn't offer electric charging, because who's going to stay there? There's a lot of electric cars. And it takes an electrician, 4 hours to install this thing. So why would you not have that? It's going to be as important as offering Wi-Fi connection for people. So it's a fun journey. We're in Houston, and we're going to be at the Tesla headquarters on May 4th or 5th in California, and people can get their updates from my various handles as I just gave.
By the way, you're listening to the voice of Giannis Kovacevic, and he is the author of My Electrician Drives a Porsche. Gianni, how can folks get a hold of you if they want to learn more about the book? Where can they buy it, and how can they learn more about you?
Yeah, my book is featured at all U.S. airports, so that's an easy one, at Hudson Booksellers. It's prominently featured on the premier table, so we're very happy about that, going into a second printing, by the way. They can find it on Amazon. It's on the Kindle version. It's in the hardback version, and they can dialogue with me through Twitter at Realistic Enviro, and my Facebook page, and through Instagram, The Realistic Environmentalist. And be more than happy with people that, if I'm still coming to your city and you're a group of investors, or if you want to do a little discussion, if I have time in my schedule, I'd be more than happy to facilitate, and people can get that from my personal website, the upcoming dates.
That's great. Yeah, I see you're going to be in Texas and Oklahoma and Arizona and California, just all over the place. What an exciting journey you must be on right now. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. I want to encourage people to check out this book and think about some of the things that they've heard in this interview. Very, very compelling. Thank you, Gianni, so much for your time.